Susan was the inaugural Commissioner for the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profits Commission, the ACNC, Australia's first national independent regulator of charities from 2012 to 2017, for which she holds another Guinness Book of Records prize, being the only regulator in the world to be loved by the sector you are regulating.
Can you share with us a little bit about your background? You started in education and then how you actually moved into the not-for-profit sector and then into a regulatory role.
Well, it's probably is significant that I'm one of 8 children, the first 7 born in 9 years, with a Lebanese father and a mother of Swedish, Scottish, Jewish heritage. It was always going to be a challenge for my parents to get everybody the level of education that they aspired to. And particularly, I think my dad, having been migrated as a child to Australia, for so many people of migrant background, the highest aspiration is that their kids get a really good education. Mum, who was really very progressive for her era, but in this regard, perhaps less so, she had a view that the boys could follow whatever career dream that they had, but the girls should take the opportunity that was available at the time from the federal government to take a studentship and do education. I got into teaching, and very quickly I got into the area of special education. Partly, I think, because of a bureaucratic blunder. I had said, because of the migrant background, I'd like to work in an area where there were migrant children. So I moved into that area of education, but very quickly came to the view that if you looked at it, the deficit was in the structures and the systems and the procedures of learning. It wasn't in the child in most cases, and that you actually needed to rethink how you were dealing with all of this. So I ended up getting into curriculum, which of course puts you into a more administrative level of the school, and 15 years later I'd had a fair amount of my time as an education worker in middle and senior levels, and I think then I was ready for another challenge.
How was it moving from that into then the next step, which was regulatory environment, as opposed to working in the not-for-profit world?
And that was a bit of a surprise, really, and I suspect there's a lot of women in the room, and this may be generational. The younger women here mightn't feel it so strongly, but I didn't really have a sense of a linear career trajectory. Many of the young men that I knew, they certainly did. By the time they were 30, they were going to have done such and such, like they might have been a deputy principal, and by the 35 they were going to be a principal, and they had it all mapped out. And I think for many women in that generation and this generation, because they're explicitly parenting and undertaking professional work, they're not necessarily scheduling their life in that way, and so for me it was much more organic. In relation to the regulatory work, I had been I'd gone into senior roles in the Catholic Education Office in Melbourne, and then I was appointed as the Chief Executive of the Curriculum and Assessment Authority, which most of you would know about, particularly anyone who's a VCE graduate in Victoria. And then I was appointed back. I applied and was appointed back to be the Director of Catholic Education in Victoria. And to what was, we just have to say it bluntly, not a very strong governance model. I had 3 jobs. I was Director of Catholic Education for the Archdiocese of Melbourne, which was a big job. I was the Chief Executive for the Catholic Education Commission of Victoria, which was the legal entity that brought together the 4 dioceses of Victoria. There are 3 country dioceses, and was responsible for the receipt, distribution and accountability of $1.4 billion in government funding, so a fairly significant, there were 500 schools, large enterprise. But at the same time, I chaired the board of the CECV, the Catholic Education Commission of Victoria. So as the chair of the board, I oversaw my work as chief executive, and as chief executive of the CECV, I oversaw the work of the Catholic Education Office Melbourne. So quite a bit of effort was put into reviewing and renewing this particular governance model.
You're talking about governance models. What does a good governance model look like in the not-for-profit sector?
In some ways, I think it's worth thinking about it in relation to the role of the board as well as the conduct of the enterprise. So in relation to the board, the role of the board, it's clarity about role, it's clarity of mission, it's strategic planning and business planning that's associated with that. It's ensuring that there's not mission drift, and in fact you are doing what you were created to do. And that's easier said than done, because so many charities, having been created, then struggle to get the funding to really keep them viable. So they may be chasing government grants or other forms of income that do deviate them from what their core purpose is. So that, particularly if it gets into commercial areas, that can be difficult.
Ladies and gentlemen, will you join me in thanking Susan?